Welcome to Wisconsin in Focus. I'm Bruce Walker, Great Lakes Regional Editor for the Center Square. Joining me today is the Center Square Wisconsin correspondent, Benjamin Yount. You've been writing an awful lot about, once again, the agitations towards flat tax in Wisconsin's capital. Elaborate.
This was a plan that we first started to write about. Well, we first started to write about it back before the November election of last year. Tony Evers, as governor, for his first 4 years, there was essential gridlock at the Capitol. Wisconsin Republicans wanted to do a lot of things. The governor wasn't going to allow them. So the hope of a Tim Michels for governor was that there would be a Republican. It was supposed to be a Republican year. All the headwinds were turning the state red, and budget reformers, including former Governor Scott Walker and the Institute for Reforming Government, launched a plan to take Wisconsin to zero income tax. And if not zero, then a flat tax. And we first started writing this in the build up to the election. Well, Tony Evers wins re-election, and it sort of dies down for a few months. Flash forward to January. Top Senate Republican Devin LeMahieu, the majority leader if you're keeping your scorecard at home, unveils a plan to take Wisconsin to 3.25% flat income tax. Now, that would make Wisconsin the lowest income tax state in the Midwest. Illinois is flat at 4.95. I believe Michigan is flat at about 4.5%. Iowa is moving to a flat tax in the threes, but not 3.25. And Minnesota, our neighbor to the west, is one of the highest taxed states in the Midwest, with a top rate that goes up to over 9%. And the sales pitch on the flat tax is twofold. One, it's a more fair tax for people in the middle class. And two, as Republicans put it, it will be a way to attract people to Wisconsin. Again, the notion being, during the coronavirus, it was proven that you could live anywhere. And if you can live anywhere, then why not move to Wisconsin? It is a beautiful state with lots of areas for families to grow. The problem is Governor Evers, one of the problems, I should say, is that Governor Evers has promised to scuttle any flat tax that comes out. So at this point, whatever talk of a flat tax is more white paper. It's more academic. It's the idea of a flat tax rather than an actual proposal for a flat tax.
I'm just going to go out on a limb here, and I actually have a cheat sheet because I read your stories already, so I know the answer to this question already. And that is the governor, as well as the Democrats in Wisconsin, are all of the same mind that a flat tax is basically wealthy not paying their fair share. Is that correct?
Yeah. This is the line that you will hear from the governor and from all legislative Democrats, is that a flat tax is a tax cut for millionaires. And when you go from a progressive tax, which Wisconsin has, people who make at the upper end of the income spectrum are paying over 7%, 7.65, if my memory serves me correct. And when you go from that to 3.25, people who make more will get a substantial income tax cut. But as supporters point out, as Devin LeMahieu said at a Senate committee hearing this week, everyone will get a tax cut. The people on the lower end of the spectrum will see their taxes lowered as well. And again, people who make the least in this state really don't pay taxes anyway. They may have it taken out of their check, but at the end of the year, they get money back.
They get it back.
It is one of these arguments that you see not just in Wisconsin, but across the country. The interesting thing here is that, like I said, it's not just the governor. It's not just legislative Democrats. Republicans in the assembly seem to have abandoned the idea as well. This was Speaker Robin Vos earlier this week, not throwing cold water on the Senate's plan, but not necessarily being open to it either.
Assembly Republicans have been spending most of our time focusing on kind of listening. I think we're in the middle of doing our public hearings. Mine are next week in my own district. So I think an awful lot of us want to take the time to listen first, which is why we have not necessarily said that the flat tax is the premier way we're going to adopt tax reform. We haven't ruled it out either.
we're not against it. We're not for it, but we're not against it. And that shows you the headwinds. Now, the story that we wrote this week featured Chris Reeder with the Institute for Reforming Government. And he said, look, this is just a first step. If Wisconsin can take a step towards lowering taxes, if Wisconsin can take a step towards flattening income taxes, all of that is good. And to be honest, you don't get to all of a sudden radically change a state's tax system overnight. And every time we have a conversation about the flat tax, we have to mention that there is growing concern at the Capitol that Wisconsin's $7 billion surplus could very quickly become a deficit if the economy turns south and if everyone spends all that money very, very quickly without any forethought.
In your story that you submitted today, there's an echo of Governor Evers' sentiment by Milwaukee Democratic State Senator Chris Larson, quote, legislative Republicans will bend over backward to cater to the needs of the super rich and corporations. But when it comes to those who actually need help, they want to force them to jump through flaming hoops like a circus animal in exchange for any hope of assistance.
That was an interesting day because you had two things happening at the exact same time at the Capitol. You had a Senate hearing on the flat tax, and you had an Assembly news conference where they talked about the pending vote on unemployment reforms. And this was a sweeping change that, by the way, is doomed. But it makes changes to how people who are looking for work have to look for work. Right now, you have to apply to 10% of open jobs. This package would change that to 50%. Right now, there's a complaint from a number of employers that they find people who are looking for work and they ask them for an interview, and then the job applicant just ghosts them. Or they go through with the interview and then never show up on the first day. There's also the big central piece of the unemployment reform that ties unemployment benefits to the state's jobless rate. And the lower the jobless rate is, the fewer number of weeks someone would be able to collect unemployment. The idea that Republicans have is all geared at, they say, putting people back to work, getting people back into the workforce. Because while unemployment in Wisconsin is low, the Madison area is looking at 1.7% unemployment last month. The labor participation rate is also lower. And so you just have some people who aren't back in the workforce. And that's where Chris Larson took to Twitter to point out, look, they're talking about tax cuts, as he says, for millionaires, but they're looking to force people who don't have jobs to go back to work. And that's the juxtaposition. And Democrats voted in their entirety against the unemployment reforms. And we don't know what they're going to do about a flat tax. I fully expect that they will vote in their entirety against it. If it gives you any sort of indication, there were very few questions, if any, when Senator LeMahieu was presenting his plan. Senate Republicans had all manners of questions. Senate Democrats were largely silent.
Well, listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com. I'm Bruce Walker, Great Lakes Regional Editor for The Center Square. Please subscribe, and thank you so much for listening.